Hey everybody, welcome to Experts Dig In with Doggies for Dementia. I am Carmen DeValis. I am president and founder of Doggies for Dementia Foundation. We are a nonprofit corporation, and essentially what we do is we work to reduce stigma and isolation and loneliness for people impacted by dementia. And we do this because what we realized is a lot of people don't know a lot about Alzheimer's disease or dementia, and yet many people are impacted. And it becomes such a strong it's such a strong stigma for people that I wrote a book called Just See Me: Sacred Stories from the Other Side of Dementia. The common theme was the loneliness because people didn't know what to say to them, and they didn't know how to respond or how to support them. And then what I noticed were the pictures of families with dogs were quite popular, and people jumped in to read those stories. And that's how Doggies for Dementia was born. And with that mission to educate and to empower, our YouTube show here today, Experts Dig In with Doggies for Dementia, was created where we just experts from all different parts of life, might be professional caregivers, family caregivers, and people who've done exceptional things, all around their mission to do with helping to bring light to dementia or raise funds and things along that line. So and this is going to be one of my favorite parts, actually, of our mission, because I've met some wonderful people. And today is no different. Today, our guest is Saadia White, who is a native New Yorker, but lives in Virginia now. So I need to get to Virginia pretty quick. Yeah. Yes. And I'm going to read this because I don't want to leave anything out. She's an empowerment coach, or wrote a wonderful empowerment comic book called Amazing, and that's amazing with this an E, Amazon. I so love that. And you're CEO of Eyes Wide Open, empowering people globally, and the visionary and founder of Generational Survivors. It's a global movement. And you are also a family caregiver and impacted directly by dementia. And we just happened to connect on through a it wasn't a class much as a, what's it called, Saadia?
It was a social media content creation challenge.
Yes, through eWomen. Yeah,
Women's Network.
welcome. Yes. Oh my gosh, it's taken us a few months, but it's well worth it. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Carmen.
Oh my
It is
gosh.
definitely a pleasure to be here. I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thank you. And I know our listeners are going to love to hear your story. And you do some wonderful things. And, I know part of that has to do with, where you came from and all that happened. And which, I really, really love when we have can go back and take a look at things and say, now what? Now what?
Right.
And to think that without boundaries, so to speak, and then it just continues to grow.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I always say that there is strength in our struggles, and I took my struggles not as a downward spiral, and what I did was I wanted to elevate it into a strength. So you turn those struggles into strengths, and that's where my purpose lies therein.
Yeah, and families impacted by dementia, no struggle.
Absolutely.
Because every day is a new day, and it's a lot to learn. It's a lot to learn.
Absolutely, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. So tell us a little bit about your experience as a family caregiver. Who is it that you love, and how did that come about as being that being involved with this?
Absolutely. So I call myself a rookie, like a newborn to this. Actually, it was my other dad, and I have two dads, and he's not my biological father, but he did help to raise me. And he's my sister's biological father. My sister, unfortunately, cannot be here. She's doing her fellowship in San Francisco as a doctor. So he's closer to me, and I'm like the closest family he has. His siblings live in Georgia. So with me being the closest one, obviously I stepped up to the plate to say, okay, my other dad is going through something. really out of the blue, because this happened about 2 years ago, when we first discovered that he had dementia, and it clearly took us by surprise. He's a very young man. He's in his early 60s, just turning 61. So that in itself was such a hard, it was so hard to grasp, So for me and my sister, we truly didn't know which way to go with it. We didn't have a lot of information about dementia. We weren't clear on what resources they would have for us. And it really was a struggle in the beginning, and it still is. We recently just had to move him this Monday to an independent assisted living facility. He can no longer live, now I'm not going to say he wasn't supervised, but he needs ongoing supervision at this stage of his dementia. A good friend of his housed him in her home. It was her secondary home that she just brought. And she figured it would be best to have him close to her family because, again, he grew up with, he knows her family very well. And he's very comfortable with she and her daughter. And we thought it would be a great idea as well, because one thing we learned with dementia, a person that has been diagnosed with dementia, is stability and the routine. The stability and the routine. So we figured that because he would be surrounded around myself, his best friend, her family, that would give him the stability and the routine that he needed to be able to cope with the dementia. But what we didn't count on is that his decline so fast, right? So that was huge for us, that decline. And what we had to do was pivot. We definitely had to pivot. So, and you know what, Carmen, I apologize. I forgot something. When he was first diagnosed, my sister did put him in another independent assisted living facility first. He did not like it. He did not like it. He was very, very verbal with his independence at that point. He's like, there's nothing wrong with me. I don't need to be here. All I see is wheelchairs and walkers. So to him, that wasn't his community. He didn't belong there. So he was very unhappy for quite some time. And then the pandemic hit, and he really couldn't have visitors, because we would come up to visit him. We would still take him to his doctor's appointments, my husband and I. And when the pandemic hit, it did not allow us to visit him. And that was one of the biggest reasons for him to move into his friend's home, so that we can have that accessible, access to him. Socialization is vital for those with dementia. Socialization, stability, routine. I've learned that in dealing within the last 2 years.
Yeah, the social piece and the connection with others, like familiar others. I could only imagine what it was like. I mean, first of all, your dad, he's looking and goes, I don't belong here. There's nothing wrong with me, right? He's not recognizing. And even if he did, there are places, some that are more suitable for some than others. And it's a group, and it changes, it's dynamic. And then when the pandemic hit, they're surrounded by people with masks, so you can't see their faces, which when it comes to familiarity and feeling comfortable where you are, to never see people's complete faces is really freaky. And it's not, it is a different, the connection piece was a lot less in that sense. And in fact, I think there were studies done showing that for staff members or for medical people who did wear masks, they had less contact with their resident or their patients also. And they were feeling the lack as well. And that on top of not being able to see families, that was just a recipe for disaster.
Oh, yes, it definitely was. It definitely was. When we moved him to the house situation, definitely he felt more comfortable,
Uh-huh.
and he received that a lot better than being in the independent assisted living facility. However, with him having dementia, of course, our concern was him leaving the house. He cannot drive, so he does not have access to a vehicle.
Right.
And with him, he wanted to walk back and forth to the store, so he got acclimated with the community that he was in, which is great. But it was a grave concern because now he was in his early stages, but our whole thing was safety. You know, how do we keep him safe?
Yeah.
Especially with him, you know, leaving the home on his own. He did not want 24-hour nursing care. We had nurses coming in and out to monitor his medication intake, make sure that he took his medication. And also we had cameras up to monitor him as well. So with that being said, it was still a huge concern for us because safety,
Yeah.
him leaving, he was still able to leave on his own, and he did not have 24-hour supervision. I mean, that's a lot. The cost of that is a lot, you know?
Oh, yeah. Yes. The cost of dementia care
Yes,
is economic through the roof,
the roof.
emotionally and economically. And it's not something we even talk about a lot, but it is a big problem for people because family members will often say somebody needs to be here full time. Someone needs to give up a
Absolutely.
job or career and be here. And when you love someone, you're saying, yes, I want to do that and I want to be there. But, you know, going without a paycheck or a job is really almost impossible for
That's
most people.
significant. That's
Yeah.
significant, especially in African American communities, where they don't even have a lot of community resources,
Mhm.
access to resources dealing with dementia, and how do they care for a loved one? How do they be a caregiver of self and be a caregiver of someone who has dementia? And
Uh-huh.
not just in the African American communities, but in those poverty-stricken communities.
Mhm.
When it's a cultural area that's just poverty stricken,
Yeah.
and they don't have access to community resources. That's something that I was looking at, like, wow, what does a person who is not financially able or equipped
Yeah.
to manage their loved one with dementia, because it costs a lot of money.
It does.
Um,
It really does. And people, and I remember this in the clinic, families would say, well, Medicare covers all that, right? I'm like,
no, no,
no, that it is,
that's false.
it's false. That's one of those false. Yes, definitely. And it's yeah.
And we
So,
learned that the hard way. My sister was
yeah.
doing a lot of research. I mean, thank you. We're thankful because she is a doctor. Her
Mhm.
husband is a doctor. And my husband and I are both retired. He's retired from the military. I'm retired, and we're both retired from law enforcement. So
Mhm.
we're thankful in that regards that we were able to, you know, number one, she takes care of a lot of the financial needs, and we take care of a lot of the on hands needs.
Mhm.
But still, even with that being said, it's still a lot for any
Mhm.
family grappling. So imagine those who cannot afford it financially. What is our government doing for those people? You know?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
that's a grave concern of mine, especially.
I'm
Um,
I'm I'm totally with you there. And it's almost as if the thought is if we talk about the finances, then there's for some families, they thought if I talk about the financial burden, it's as if I don't care about my loved one. You know, it's like two things. You care, you just give, and you don't really want to talk about the burden part. And but it's there, and you could love. That doesn't mean you don't love your loved one. It just means you got to
right.
find a way to support yourselves, and it is a challenge. And I have heard about things that are coming up that are for family caregivers, different bills. I think it's bills. I know very little about politics, Saadia, very little,
Right.
but I need to know
I'm
more.
with you.
I really need to know more. If I say, you know, I'm an advocate, I really need to know more. And they're coming up to help to pay for the family caregivers who are there. for a certain amount of time. And I think as it stands right now, if they're covered under like the state Medicaid, it varies from state to state what is covered. But I'm here to tell you it's not enough, and it's just cannot make up for being 24/7 caregiver and or bringing in care at the cost that it is to bring in caregiver. There's a lot of different providers out there that can give you some help and support, but you got to pay for that. And
You have
Medicare
to pay for
doesn't
that.
pay for that. You got to pay for
Absolutely.
that. That's out of your pocket. And yeah, and so then you're looking at it going, wow, safety is the line in the sand for
Mhm.
just about everybody. And one of the things I always said in the clinic when people were saying, I'm not quite sure what to do and when is it the right time, I'd say safety is your line in the sand.
Absolutely.
If you drive away, let's say if you're worried about somebody even driving and you don't want to have your kids in the car with them, that's your line in the sand. And
Absolutely.
driving's like, if you visit and you leave and you're like, oh my gosh, I am so worried about that, is your line in the sand, because it changes just that quick.
Absolutely. It
And
definitely does.
yeah, and
With me being prior law enforcement, one of my
yeah,
grave concerns too was someone, him forgetting where he was going, where he was coming back from or leaving the home and getting lost and
yes,
looking really confused. And with him being a Black man, let's be candid here. There are a lot of things going on with the local law enforcement all over.
yeah,
And I did not want him to be in a situation where he's looking so confused and lost that people think that he's a danger. He's a fairly big man as far as his stature. He's very
mm-hmm.
muscular and he can look threatening, but he's not. He's a gentle giant. And not only to mention that he has dementia. So
Mm-hmm.
how is our local law enforcement handling that? Are they
Yes,
equipped with the knowledge of how to recognize a person or even how to ask this person how to recognize a person with dementia? So that's one of the things that being a caregiver to a loved one with dementia, I wanted to raise that to my local law enforcement communities because
yeah.
that's vital.
Oh,
That's vital.
you were so on target with that. And we've probably seen some videos on, that of people being stopped because it's as if they're on some kind of drugs or
Drug.
alcohol.
Exactly.
They're
Exactly.
confused and they don't
Exactly.
understand somebody coming up. It's scary. Someone
Yes.
coming up in uniform asking questions, especially when there has been a lifetime of some law enforcement. There's just like, oh my gosh, are they going to arrest me? What's going to happen? It's scary.
Exactly.
And the judgment and insight with dementia just would make a person want to sometimes run. And
Absolutely.
then it's like, oh my goodness, here we go. And nor do they have the wherewithal to like pull out that card that says I have dementia. You can have a card.
Because they might forget.
You're gonna, yeah, you're not gonna remember that.
Right.
And I think law enforcement. You can tell me if I'm right or wrong about this because you'd know a whole lot better. If we take a look and we do a slice of our culture, most people don't know a lot about dementia unless it's impacted them directly. And I think probably law enforcement is along those lines. Like some know,
Absolutely.
some don't. And, how do they handle that? And I got calls in the clinic from family members. Please help us. Dad's been arrested. He was in a shop and picked something up and they arrested him for shoplifting. And they think he's, that he's been drinking and he was really roughed up. And I'm like, oh my gosh.
And
Mm-hmm.
that's the concern. That's a grave concern because you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about law enforcement who a lot of people look at law enforcement and they look at them to handle medical. They want, law enforcement is supposed to have different hats, but that's not the case. We
Mm-hmm.
are law enforcement. We are there to enforce the law, right?
Right.
But there are so many different cases where someone with a mental altered state, we come across them, we're not recognizing the signs. Law enforcement doesn't recognize signs like
Mm-hmm.
that. They're not properly trained on how to identify what questions to ask, what the verbiage is. And that was my concern.
Mm-hmm.
How do you recognize this individual for what they have? And what type of verbiage are you using to identify this? Do you have that? Have you been trained on that? And I can tell you, when I was in law enforcement, I was not trained on how to approach a person or identify a person with dementia or Alzheimer's. And I'll give you one example. Just recently, about 2 weeks ago, I was in the grocery store. There was a woman. She looked very confused, older woman. She looked very confused, very like her altered sense, mental state was like altered. And I looked at her, and she kept walking up to people, and I was like, I wonder, does she have dementia or Alzheimer's? The security officer, like, she walked over to the security officer, and she just stood there. And the security officer immediately was like, well, I don't know what's wrong with her. She keeps following me around the store. And I politely said to her, I said, listen, she may have dementia or Alzheimer's, and she may have forgotten what she was doing there. So be gentle with her in your approach. So even with security, down to that, because that could have, she could have, the security officer could have called the local law enforcement department to, talk with this woman. But there are certain things that you have to kind of look for. And we have to be able to recognize that in those types of positions, as medical, as fire, as law, these are things that need to be enforced throughout training.
Right.
Even down to your security.
Yeah. Like, could that be dementia?
Right.
Let me approach it in such a way.
It could be schizophrenia. It could be anything, but let's approach it with care, right? Care and concern.
Right. And, again, the more we know, the better we do. And it's a scary thing when you don't know what's going on. You're like, is this person going to hurt me? Or is this safe? Is this, from a person's standpoint, watching? And some people will walk away. Some people will kind of stand and watch and feel it out. And others will approach and take the chance to see. And, the more and more we see that people have dementia, it's difficult to find someone who hasn't been impacted in some way, but it doesn't mean that they understand it and that they know. And gosh, I so love that you're involved with previous law enforcement to have this input, because we haven't had that. And this is a problem. Even I had, there was a support group, and women were talking about when they travel and their husbands do pretty good. Say the husbands have dementia and the wives are their caregivers, and they said, or vice versa. And their biggest problem traveling is when they need to let them go to the restroom on their own, because they don't want to walk in and they think maybe it's okay still. There are times that they'll just wait and say, hey, I have to come in with, and they just do. But that's another thing too. But what happens in the restroom, in this big public restroom, when they're not there?
Right.
And there have been times, you say, where I'm standing and I'm waiting, and all of a sudden security is on their way in there, and like, oh my goodness, I needed to. And it was really disruptive and scary and terrifying for their loved one. And nor could they walk away and say, go to the restroom on their own and leave their spouse unattended. So how did they do that? And did they said, I really wanted to tell someone that was there, can you just be and observe for a few minutes? But so many people didn't understand what they were talking. They go, you want me to watch somebody with Alzheimer's? I don't understand. And I'm afraid
they don't understand the severity of it. And I think that airports should, because this is a concern of mine with individuals with dementia or any mental altered state. I think that they need to upgrade where they have escorts, escorts to deal with people with those disabilities. And I'm not sure, they may have that implemented, but I'm not sure if they're trained in dealing with an individual with dementia, so.
Yeah, and those, and especially like talking about your other dad, there's a fine line there, right? Between, I have a friend I think he's 60 now, but friends he's probably been diagnosed like 4 years. And he say, I want to be treated like everybody else. I don't want to be treated special. I don't want it to be like a big tag around my neck and things like that. And I want to be treated with respect. And then at the same token, when I'm having a hard time, I want people to understand. and to approach me in such a way. So I'm like, well, what's the sweet spot there
With the
where
fine line.
where is that? And that's really individual. It needs to be talked about, I think, beforehand for as best as possible based on, because we have our personalities that usually carry
Mhm.
through, not always, sometimes things change, but what is the like, would they be offended if you tell people there and have it on? Because you can, when you sign up, you can, I think, special needs or something, you can put dementia or Alzheimer's and things. And I think it varies from airline to airline and what happens with that. But that's that's another area that definitely needs to be looked at,
Absolutely.
because people will travel with more than one person, but sometimes it's spouses. I mean, and
Exactly.
when they're doing pretty good, or other family members, when a person's doing pretty good, but you don't know that the lights and all the people and the change in the environment, I mean, it sets me off a little bit, and I don't have Alzheimer's. It's a lot of
Exactly.
noise and action and overhead, like gate changes and all, just all of it is just highly stimulating, and it could really cause a person to get confused. And
Absolutely. I
that
mean, we get
is,
confused going into an airport. We
yeah,
don't know. We don't have dementia,
yeah,
so I get
yeah.
confused.
We have
What
our
gate do
tools
I go to?
like,
Like you just said, like, you know,
yeah. And how far is that? It looks like it's
right.
like, I don't know. Yeah, it's crazy. And that's one of, it's that area around education that I think, we're just working so hard to at least bring it to the table to say, let's talk about this, and
Yes,
maybe have one person on duty, a shift, who is familiar. They're the ones to go to ask for some
absolutely.
guidance in that. That would be an improvement. Before I let you go, though, I want to talk about an important topic, and you touched on it, having to do with resources, because that's another area I found, even as a 40 years in nursing, nurse practitioner, and I would give family information. We didn't have a whole lot other than the big Alzheimer's groups, and there are now a lot of nonprofits and other business, other businesses that are doing resources. And when you mentioned in the Black community and the African American community, and how and other communities that just don't have those resources, what are people doing? Where are they getting their information? And do they access the online things that are out
Hmm,
there that are so much more now given the pandemic and stuff? But I know not everybody has a computer or understands how to
exactly.
use it or access that. Where do they find it? And
So
um,
that's a growing concern, especially from in African American communities to poverty-stricken communities with all different ethnicities. That's a growing concern because a lot of people don't have access to a computer. A lot of people don't have access to a vehicle. So how do we funnel in those resources? So
mhm,
I started looking at this from that point of view, and I decided with Eyes Wide Open, Empower People Globally, my organization, that these are resources that I want to funnel out to my community, whether it be like dropping, trying to get newsletters together with listings of resources to where they need to go,
uh-huh.
and having them mailed out like along with the regular mail, because a lot of people get their mail, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm,
those who are affected by not having access to an internet or computer or what have you, they do receive mail. So
mhm,
maybe we can have our local police departments, our politicians, including their resources of how they can get to these different places, who offers caregiving for dementia,
mhm.
what type of resources they offer. So these are things that I will be bringing up to my community board, the local community board, and other boards around the area, just to see what kind of avenues are you taking to funnel in this information for
Mhm,
especially those communities that do not have the luxury of
mhm.
internet, and
Yes.
even understanding how to work an internet. The one biggest thing during the pandemic is what we learned, that there were a lot of people who had children at home, a lot of grandparents who are parenting their grandkids
Mhm.
because of different things going on with the actual parents, and
Uh-huh.
they didn't understand how to work a computer, right?
Uh-huh.
They didn't
And they're
have
supposed
access
to
to
tap into
that.
school and
Absolutely.
be the teacher during this. And it's kind of like, what?
Right. So
Yeah.
you learn how to pivot. And I think this
Yeah.
has taught us as a whole community abroad that we have to utilize all avenues, just not be so inundated to our computer or our internet, because
Mhm.
everyone does not have that same luxury. So
Yes,
how else
luxury.
can we funnel? Because that is a luxury. That's not
Hmm.
something that's a necessity. It is a
Hmm.
luxury.
It
And
is.
that
It
and
is.
I
We
had to
forget
learn
about
that.
that sometimes because for
Absolutely.
those of us that are on it all the time, it is a necessity in business and things, but it is a luxury
It
to
is a
have it.
luxury to have it,
It is.
right?
It
So
is.
how are we funneling this information? And I believe
Uh-huh.
that our local law enforcement departments, our politicians, those people need to have more hands-on with dealing with the resources as far as newsletters, getting those resources out to the communities, the local organizations such as your organization in your community. Oh, Doggies for Dementia. Oh, how can I locate her? This is in a newsletter. Oh,
Uh-huh.
Carmen, okay, we can reach her via this, you
Right.
know? So
Right.
that's information that the communities need to have, especially those high-risk communities who are
Mhm.
stricken with poverty. And in an African American communities, it's definitely a disparity there,
Oh,
uh, a huge health disparity,
huge
you
health
know?
disparity.
Hmm.
And in fact, many people are afflicted by dementia.
In
And
the
it's
African
even,
American
and
community.
it's not diagnosed
No,
because then even to say the family doctor, do we go to the doctor with this? How do you explain this? Is it really, what is it? And it's just kind of like, oh, well, maybe that's just aging,
no,
and
it's not.
it's not. And so that's huge. I mean, the some of the care providers in the neighborhoods are like, okay, we're like booked up. We've got our 15-minute
Mhm.
appointments, and
That's it.
families aren't sure how to describe it, and or how they're there with their loved one. Again, there's that respect and that line there, right? And they're like, I don't know how to tell the doctor what's happening without hurting his feelings.
Well, let
And
me tell you something. Me being there present for my other dad's doctor's appointments, that is huge.
it
That
is.
right there, trying to express that piece while he's there
Uh-huh.
to, because you don't want to hurt his feelings, but you have to convey to the doctor what is happening here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
when you're trying to express that, um, you know, there's no cookie cutter way to put it. You
Mm-hmm.
have to tell the doctor so that he or she could be properly diagnosed.
Right.
And that to me was one of the most, and then so that they can start receiving the care that they really need.
Mm-hmm.
So in
Yeah.
African American communities, there is not the healthcare is a huge thing. Like we said again, huge disparity there, right? So there's
Mm-hmm.
not a lot of access to that.
Right.
Okay. And then
Right.
there's a lot of the culture that doesn't feel like they need to go to the doctor.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, my loved one is forgetting here and there, but it's okay.
Yeah.
But it's
And
not
well, grandma
okay.
before that did that
Yeah,
too. It's just how the
right.
family
This is
is.
just how the family is. So, if you're not
Mm-hmm.
versed and if you're not aware of what dementia is, what Alzheimer's is, you would look past it and you would
Mm-hmm.
normalize that routine.
Mm-hmm.
That's, to me, it's a normalized condition in the community. And we
Right.
definitely have to break that stigma of having
Yeah.
those normalized conditions and really advocating on the behalf of our loved ones and for healthcare
Yeah.
in terms of those certain issues
Mm-hmm.
with dementia.
I so love this conversation because, as a clinician, I would see people come in the office and I'm like, okay, this is what, and I'm going to tell you one thing too before I forget. For families wondering what to do, I asked my families to write me a note of what was happening. And
Yes.
then I would approach it in a way of asking and kind of feeling it out. But that gave me two sides to the story. I got the family's perspective, and every family member has a different perspective. Oftentimes, like different, and that's okay because we're all human. We see things differently, and we have our own
Absolutely.
biases. And like, she's always been a little quirky. I don't think it's unusual that she wear 2 different color shoes because she's always been a little quirky. And the other one's like, that's not okay. And then the perspective of the person with dementia, and that's respectful, is to take it all in. And I know healthcare providers are, again, I have the luxury of a clinic that they said, look, Carmen, you're talking to the families. If you need 30, 45 minutes to get all you need to and to talk to the various family members, take that, because that's really important. But I know how few and far between those kind of situations are.
Exactly.
I was just, and I loved what I did, and I loved it there because of that. I still left to write a book and do stuff, but I really loved, I ended my career on such a high note in that case. But I know that's not common. And even then, the stigma associated with it, people say, please don't tell me it's dementia, or don't tell me it's Alzheimer's. And I don't know how to tell my family. And I'm like, I get that. It's this, yeah. So we have a long ways to go, but there are little things. And I'm wondering about communities, if like some of the communities you're talking about, the more, we've got some poverty-stricken communities and the resources are low. Are there local community places where people do go? I mean, my one thought is like a library setting, or is there a place where people gather where they might hear about it and be able to be given?
There's not enough of that, especially in these poverty-stricken communities, and sometimes not even a poverty-stricken community.
Yeah,
it's just not enough of the conversation going on.
Yeah,
there definitely needs to be more of a resource-based place where individuals can go, especially caregivers. Where does the caregiver go? What type of groups do they have? Is there anyone that the caregiver themselves can talk to that can identify with what they're going through? Because not only is the individual who has dementia going through, but the caregiver is going through.
Oh, often invisible. They're often invisible and not asked. Like, I can't tell you how many times I looked at the family member and said, how are you doing? And it would be the tears, because nobody's asked that.
Right.
And
because it's expected.
The hardest thing.
It's oftentimes it's expected. It's like, okay, this is your family member. You have to do this.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing like when my sister was, she's actually she's over his estate, and she advocates for him, as do I, but because she is over the estate, a lot of the burden is on her. Yeah. Especially the financial burden. And I will say, we are blessed because she and her husband are doctors, right? So that right there is a blessing.
Yes.
And, with myself, like I said before, myself and my husband being in the situation that we're in, being retired and having access to a lot of different things due to the brand and the business, we are in a blessed situation. A lot of people do not have the type of blessings that we're receiving.
No, I mean, they might start looking for what can we do? Okay, it's time for placement. They've just made that decision. And then they start to look around. They're like, well, what do you mean it's it's like $3,000 to $10,000 a month? Depending. Like 3 to 10. And how much does Medicare pay for that?
Nothing.
No. Do they qualify for Medicaid?
We recently went into an independent living facility. So we're at the high but low end of the payment range right now, because he's living in an apartment on his own. He has not been upgraded yet. So the more they upgrade to assisted, the more person has to come in for care, the higher the amount goes up.
Yes.
You have to pay for all those services. Those services are not for free, and Medicaid does not provide a way. So how do people in low income families sustain?
Yeah.
It's not sustainable. A lot of times they're just being placed in a home, and you have people running in and out, like trying to do the best that they can, because they cannot leave their jobs. They can't do 24-hour supervision because they're not getting paid. And they're already in a low income based situation as is.
Right. So even more important for that community awareness, because in those situations, and family doing their absolute best to not leave, their loved one unattended. It
Yes.
happens. And or maybe it's I hear more and more of teenagers getting involved, and millennials being stopping in and learning and being there. But there are times they're not attended, and they
Yeah.
can go for a walk and not be aware of what's happening, or it's very
Mhm.
frightening. Everything's very frightening.
It is.
And yeah, well, you have certainly maybe think about like our mission for education and empowerment and reducing stigma, and like what else are we doing in the community? And I can tell you, I know that there are luxuries in my community that some don't have and things, but still there's a real lack of information of
Mhm.
what it is, what's dementia, what's Alzheimer's. I hear this so many times. I'm like, oh, it's Alzheimer's. Thank God it's not dementia, or things like that. I'm like, oh, okay, we got to kind of talk about that. But and then how to support caregivers, because there are
Mhm.
people doing the every day and trying to figure out, what do I do today? This is different.
Yes,
And what about me? How do I even get 5 minutes to myself, or even
absolutely.
it's like not even being able to take a shower and not worry about what's going to happen, with their loved one. And how
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, that's a real thing. And how do we support them? And what are we doing to help be successful? Because the trickle down for our country in this case is huge.
Yes, it is.
And it's huge. And because then what happens is caregivers also get sicker and emotionally have problems, and they have a higher rate of developing the disease themselves, because
Absolutely.
it is stressful. It is stressful on top of stress. So yeah. Yeah, so we maybe we just need to partner on that some, Saadia, and do some stuff
I'm open.
together. And
I'm
as
open.
you're talking, I'm like, I am there. I am there. I used to do house calls, and I would just go everywhere and anywhere, and I saw the differences. I'm like, what can we do? What can we
Wow.
do? And it begins with those little steps that people do together, and like take this step and then that step, and then just keep growing. And we're getting ready to add a full out resource page to our website. And but then again, if people don't have internet or know how to access that,
That's
they're not
why
going to get that.
exactly. So I encourage you, Carmen, to visit your local boards, community boards, and tell them
Mhm,
that they need to have newsletters in
mhm,
place that go into the mailing system, you know, to kind of provide those resources through through that type
mhm.
of funneling, because
Yeah,
everyone again does not have access
do
to
not
the
have.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Yeah. And then to look at what the libraries are putting out there, or what's
Right.
being put in the community grocery store. Are there flyers there
Local
about?
businesses, a lot of local
Mhm,
businesses, they're not informed about
mm-mm.
how to handle a person who comes into their store with dementia,
Of course
Alzheimer's.
not. Yeah. How would they
They don't
be?
have, they wouldn't be.
How would
But
they be?
these are things that need to be discussed. Like, how do we get
Hmm.
our communities involved with this? And the
Hmm.
communities involved, that's including our business people, our
Hmm.
local business persons, their businesses, and how it impacts them and what they can do to be a resource to someone's loved one.
Hmm.
Maybe you've seen the same person walking back and forth in front of your store
Hmm.
like 10 times and they're looking lost. Well, don't ignore that situation.
Right.
As a business person, you're in the community, kind of go up, hey, do you need some help? How can I help
Hmm.
you?
Hmm.
How do you approach a individual? Maybe you don't want to get involved because you're scared. There are a lot of
Hmm.
people who are scared. So now
Yeah.
you call your local law enforcement and get
Hmm.
them involved. But these are conversations that definitely need to be had.
So big, yeah. So Chamber of Commerce, how are we reaching
Absolutely.
people? So good. So there needs to be a plan. A
Absolutely. Plan of action.
plan of action. I so love it. It's
POA.
inspired me today, Saadia. We're so inspired because we, as our organization, is just barely a year old, and then the pandemic. Yes, we started did the paperwork for the nonprofit in around March.
Awesome.
Yeah. However, during this time and before that, it was part of my other business. So I've been doing this for a while, officially a nonprofit, and then just looking to go, what is needed? What is
Mhm.
needed around? And we're getting ready to train people interested in photography to carry on the work of Doggies for Dementia out there and about, which is to help spread. This is how we raise awareness too and tell the story. And I'm going to need to get to Virginia, I think, and me
Yay.
too, and your other dad, and yeah, and just share the story. And by then, we'll have even more stories. Well,
Absolutely. That
what
would be
now?
phenomenal.
Oh yeah, okay, goosebumps. So that was that. That's how I know there's a God bumps, right? I'm like, okay, okay, I'm listening. I gotcha. Yeah, so exciting. Well, I could talk forever, but we're gonna need to close out. Yeah, yeah, this might be a part two, and like what are we doing next? So that's exciting piece. And
Absolutely.
how can people, I mean, we didn't even get into all the wonderful things you do, but we can certainly see what a wonderful person you are. And I know you're doing some great things. I want to just touch on that a little bit, and how can people find you?
Well, as the CEO and founder of Eyes Wide Open, Empowering People Globally is definitely my diamond brand. So we'll have a couple of branches. The comic book, Amazing Amazon, which is an empowerment comic book. It's based off of me and who I am as an Amazonian. I'm a very statuesque woman. And at one point in my life, I did not have such high self-esteem. I had to build that confidence. There were a lot of different things that happened to me as a child that I had to break through and I had to heal through, which is how Generational Survivors was formed. Please, please go on to my website. My mother was a victim of domestic violence, and I was a witness to that. And I was also a victim of child molestation. So what I had to do was heal through my struggles, my pain. And once I did that, God gave me the vision for Eyes Wide Open, Empowering People Globally, and Generational Survivors, as well as Amazing Amazon. That's why I call it the Diamond brand. And there are a lot of great things coming out of that we have birthed. We try to provide as many resources as we can through Eyes Wide Open, from human trafficking, domestic violence. Now I'm adding dementia, Alzheimer's awareness, because it's directly impacted me. And I feel like there's a need to highlight that in the community. That's according to Eyes Wide Open. Let's open our eyes, people. We need to empower our communities. Communities take care of communities, right? But we have to build that resource. We have to build the education, to put that out, push that out there, so that all communities can be impacted, not just the ones who can financially afford it, but all communities, from the high to the middle to the low, right? So what I do is provide those resources through the organization. And we have a lot of different journeys that we have taken with Eyes Wide Open, Empowering People Globally. And I'm very excited about what's to come as a life trainer, because I am a life trainer. I deal with mindset and self-development, especially for those professionals and those women and men who are impacted by loved ones such as this, and they're kind of stuck. They have to pivot and change their trajectory within their life. How does one change the trajectory, right? It's a lot to bear. And sometimes we get stuck, and we have to think about ways on how we can elevate and give ourselves self-care, and how we can continue to empower ourselves. Because for me, it's about self-leadership. How do you become a leader of self? How do you empower you? You understand? Because I can't empower you if I can't empower myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I can't take care of my loved one if I can't take care of myself. So, and the best way to kind of follow me is I'm on Instagram. That's one of the best ways. But then I will also love for you to hit my website, www.generationalsurvivors with an S.com, generationalsurvivors.com, and just kind of subscribe, and you'll see all of the ways to contact me. I'm all over social media, from Facebook to Instagram to Twitter. I'm all over it.
Those will all be on the description too, on the video. And I encourage you to reach out, take a look. Just as you were talking, like my eyes just started to tear up because you're just phenomenal in what you're doing and your
Thank you.
spirit. And I think about the day that we were on that challenge together, and I had written what I do, and you wrote a comment. And I think that's just the beginning of something really fantastic. Really
Absolutely.
fantastic.
Absolutely.
I so love that. All right, everybody, on that note, we are going to close. Be sure and reach out to both Doggies for Dementia and to Saadia's amazing, amazing journey. And it's just the beginning. We'll see you
Yes.
soon. Bye-bye.